official podcast of JetNation.com, the largest independent fan site in the NFL. Be sure to check out our forums and talk all things Jets with thousands of other die-hard Jets fans. Now, to get you up to date on all the latest Jets news, notes, and quotes, here's your host, Glenn Naughton.
Good evening, Jets fans. I am Glenn Naughton. This is JetNation Radio. And we are on a few days late because we wanted to do a show specifically following the unveiling of the new uniforms, which, of course, was last night in New York. But before we get into that, let's just kick off by thanking our sponsor, who is, of course, FanDuel Sportsbook. This episode of JetNation Radio is sponsored by FanDuel Sportsbook. If you're in New Jersey, you can get a $500 risk-free bet when you sign up. This applies to all of FanDuel Sportsbook's markets, whether you go for NBA, NHL, MLB, or anything else. Sign up today. Check it out. FanDuel Sportsbook. So, the big unveiling last night in New York City. The Jets had basically everyone on hand. There were current players, there were former players, there were some old timers, some not so long ago timers. There were plenty of fans, there were blog sites there. JetNation was on the scene. There were plenty of course, the entire Jets beat was there. And a uniform that was unfortunately leaked the night before. Where that came from, we do not know. Whether or not the Jets know, we'll, I'm sure they'll discuss that internally. But the uniforms themselves, reaction by and large, pretty good on Jets Twitter. We threw up a poll there a little while ago, earlier today, sitting at over 700 votes. 65% say they love it. Only 3 or 4% said they hate it, and all the rest were just meh. Not terrible, not great, which I'm fine with, to be honest, because, this is all a matter of personal opinion. But for me, myself, I'm not a big fashion guy. My only concern with this uniform was, please don't be atrocious. And some may feel it is. Me personally, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, well, it's not perfect. I will say, if I had to pick one thing that I'm not a fan of, don't love the helmet logo. I would have liked a more obvious jet within the picture. And for those of you who didn't notice, I didn't notice either. Someone pointed it out on Twitter. If you look at the laces of the ball, it says Jets in the bubble letters underneath that. It's got the football. The laces are actually the outline of a forward-facing jet. But it's such a small, tiny detail that I think the team should have made an effort to make it a bigger part of the logo. So that would be my one gripe. Leading up to it, I was like, do I want to see a black alternate? Is that too sort of 90s? Whenever everybody, I remember as a kid thinking how cool it would be if they had a black uniform. And but I'll tell you what, man, I think that might have been my favorite one. I really did like the black uniform. I thought it looked excellent. The green, probably my least favorite. What did they call it? Gotham green, spotlight white, and stealth black. Neil Glatt was there, team president. He spoke. Owner Christopher Johnson was there. He spoke. Now, there was some conversation today on Twitter about, was it too much? Was it too over the top? Somebody said to me that this isn't an Apple launching a new iPhone. Why all the hoopla? It's a new uniform. And I get it, but I also understand the Jets' perspective where this is, listen, and this is what I said in my reply on Twitter. They're not Apple, but they are a multi-billion-dollar business. They're trying to get their customers fired up. This is supposed to be a turning point now. Christopher Johnson said it last year when Sam Darnold was drafted. This is a turning point for our organization. And this is that next step of a fresh start. Let's get the fan base fired up. Let's bring them out to the city to meet the players. As I said, players current, players past. Christopher Johnson worked the crowd a little bit. As I said, team president Neil Glatt was there. Players on hand, of course, you had Sam Darnold, you had Jamal Adams, you had Robbie Anderson, you had Leo. Chris Herndon was there. Avery Williamson was there. Quincy Enunwa was there. They were loving it. They're pumped up. I mean, of course, they're playing to the crowd a little bit. They're not going to go out there, mopey with their heads hanging at a fan event. But listen, it's not the end of the world if you like the uniforms or not. At the end of the day, it's about wins and losses. But it's still it's a fun topic, I guess. And it's like I said, my concern was don't come out in something that's atrocious. And I have seen some fans who say they're just that. They're terrible. They suck. Come on. They're not even looking at it cynically. Like if I try to find something to not like about them, they're not, at their worst, they're not that bad. And like I said, I think the black is pretty sharp. And even though, like I said, I don't like the bubbles, the bubble letters, that style, I like the shine. Had some shine to it. So overall, I'm happy with them. If you're not, what are you gonna do? You're gonna stop rooting for the Jets because you don't like the clothes they wear anymore? Like, I know the saying "root for the laundry," but are you literally rooting for the color patterns? I mean, who does that? Is it really gonna take that much enjoyment out of your game day experience? Oh, I just went 14-2, but those uniforms are horrible. I'm not going to any more games. No, I'm not saying they won 14-2 this year. 13-3. But no, seriously. The uniforms are what they are. Again, unfortunately, they were leaked the night before. But I'm just excited for football. And anytime, listen, we know this all too well. Something about a fresh start, new coach, new coordinators, players added via free agency. These things happen, and you're like, you want to get last season out of your mind so bad that you want the season to start tomorrow. And you hear it every time there's a big off season. Free agency kicks off, you sign 2 or 3 big names, and it's like, why can't the season start tomorrow? And that's how we feel, and I get it. You want football to get underway. You got Adam Gase, another part of this new era. And, we'll see where it goes. The more I look at this offense, the more I look at the pieces that are in place right now, and I've talked about it, how this could be one of the most prolific offenses this team has ever had. If, Sam Darnold being the key factor, if he continues to develop. Because if he does, you then have a bona fide franchise quarterback. And as that, we've gone over it, they now have a top 3, arguably top 1 running back. Quincy and Robbie can get it done. Herndon showed a lot of promise. Crowder's going to be should be a fit, should give defenses fits out of the slot. I think this team has some pieces in place where you look at what Adam Gase did in Miami when he had a healthy Ryan Tannehill. He wasn't bad. They did a pretty good job. Ryan Tannehill, he's a guy who made some strides under Adam Gase, played some of his best football under Adam Gase. And if Adam Gase can do the same thing for Sam Darnold, get him to take another step or two in the right direction with all the weapons he has around him, this is absolutely a new era of Jets football. What it brings remains to be seen. But the franchise quarterback is entering year 2, and they've surrounded him with quality pieces. And there's no reason why this team shouldn't outperform the expectation. I mean, I saw Vegas is over-under on the Jets' wins this year with 7. I'm going over. I'm going to put a little bit of money on that. Absolutely. I said it last week. I said the last couple weeks. This is a team that can win 9-10 games. 7, I'm taking the over. Not that I endorse gambling. Gamble for fun only. Don't gamble money you don't have, for crying out loud. But yeah, uniforms are here, like them or not. And honestly, if you don't like them, over time, you're not going to realize it anymore. It's about the game. Once the games kick off, you're not going to get caught up in that. And if you are, you probably just shouldn't be watching football. So last week, we talked a little bit of draft. We went over some O-linemen. We went over some pass rushers. what I wanted to do today, I was trying to decide which positions to go over. Offense, defense, which direction to go. And I was going to do tight ends and wide receivers, but I've decided, and actually, I meant to mention this earlier with Robbie Anderson. Having said wide receivers, I just jogged my memory. I don't know if you saw Robbie Anderson last night at the event. Afterward, dressed sharp, all smiles, a little bit of an image makeover, reinventing himself. Could be something the agent tells him to do. I get it. I'm not stupid. Well, maybe I am, but not in this particular instance. Of course, players will do things to improve their public image. But Robbie Anderson is a guy who I think, you have reason to believe that with all the off-field stuff he's gone through, all of it his own doing, I'm not saying it wasn't his fault, the issues he's run into, fans wanted him cut. Some fans wanted him cut. Get rid of this guy. He's a bum. He's an idiot. I mean, for crying out loud, I saw fans calling for him to be cut, what was it, 2 years ago when he threw his helmet and drew a flag. I mean, Jesus. The way some fans approach the roster, you would think that guys that can do the things Robbie Anderson does, you would think they grow on trees. That's not the case. But I think we all know, anyone who's been around for a while, who's watched enough football, any sport really, you see these players that have their ups and downs, whether it's on the field, off the field, and you get these fluff pieces written by the media, how he's better because of this and he's better because of that, and he's learned his lesson and he's taking steps and da-da-da-da-da-da. And there was a similar piece, or a piece like that, about Robbie Anderson last year that talked about him being arrested and him spending, a night or two in jail, might have been a few hours, whatever the hell it was. And Robbie Anderson said that changed his perspective, changed his life, which maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I'm not here to say I know what the hell is going on in Robbie Anderson or anybody else's head. But it's not all that far-fetched to think that a young guy like Robbie Anderson, undrafted free agent, really, to some degree, has the world at his fingertips. He's got to know him and his agent aren't dummies in terms of what his income could become one day. Robbie Anderson knows he can be a guy who makes $100 million over the course of his career if he keeps doing the things he's doing and the quarterback play improves. So when I see a piece that says Robbie Anderson, took stock of his situation while he spent some time in jail and realized he needed to turn his life around, it's not far-fetched. It's possible. It's entirely possible that kick in the ass was what he needed. And if it was, and if he does turn it around, I'll tell you what, the Jets are going to be pretty damn happy they didn't let him go. And if he doesn't turn it around, you can let him go. But you see how he does this offseason, and when he has his best season this year, which is what I don't think there's any question, this should be the best quarterback situation he's ever had and the best offensive situation he's ever had. Unless he just doesn't see the targets, unless the Jets spread it around so much because they have so many targets, I could see that being the only thing stopping Robbie Anderson from having a 12 or 1,300-yard season with double-digit touchdowns. If he's heavily targeted, look out. If they spread it around, he'll have a high yards per catch average. Total numbers, yards and all that, may not be as high as they would on another team. But he's a guy, I'll tell you what, who, you know what it reminds me of? And I'm not saying, and I was talking to someone about this earlier, I'm not sitting here saying Robbie Anderson is going to be a Hall of Fame receiver like Chris Carter was for the Minnesota Vikings. But for those of you who remember, Chris Carter was a guy who had a couple of really nice years for the Eagles. He put up some pretty good numbers in Philly, but he had some off-field issues. He was a cokehead, and Buddy Ryan knew it, and it got out of control, and the Eagles let him go. So I'm not saying Robbie Anderson is going to be a Hall of Famer, nor am I saying Robbie Anderson's actions are as bad as Chris Carter's. I'm not. The point I'm making is that sometimes it's worth it to stick with a troubled player when they have the amount of talent that Robbie Anderson has. Now, for Chris Carter, his wake-up call was getting cut. That's what it took for him to get his head on straight and fly right and become a Hall of Famer. Luckily for the Jets, Robbie Anderson's wake-up call, or so it would seem, was doing something stupid behind the wheel, mouthing off to a cop, allegedly, and spending a little bit of time in jail and thinking about a situation and maybe growing up quite a bit in a short time. So for me, I'm pumped that he wasn't let go, and I'm excited to see what he can do in this offense. And if he does something stupid again, then you look at letting him go. But as of right now, I look back and I laugh at the people who said he should be cut because he threw his helmet and got a flag. I mean, for crying out loud, people are out of their minds. But he's the guy you got to be happy he's on your side on Sundays, on game days. So that's enough about Robbie. I've covered him quite a bit throughout the last couple of years because I'm so often shocked at the way people talk about him. Again, you would think that these track stars who can make NFL defensive backs look terrible on a consistent basis, you would think they grow on trees, and they just don't. And the Jets have one, so let's all just root for the guy and hope he gets his head on straight. But as I was saying, I was trying to decide what to preview: wide receivers, tight ends, DBs, and I decided on just one position group today because it's one of the deepest in the draft. There are a lot of interesting names, a lot of early names, a lot of late names. Well, a few late names that I really like, and it's something that jumped out at me. I think I mentioned on the air at the time when Mike McCagnon met with the media at the owners meeting or combine, I believe. Yeah, at the combine, and he was asked, what position group stood out to him, and right away he said tight ends. That was the first thing out of his mouth. It's that the tight end group stood out to him, as it should. It's a deep group this year, and no, the Jets don't have a lot of draft picks, and now with Chris Herndon on board, tight end isn't necessarily a need per se. But listen, if we're talking about building something special on offense, why in the world would you not look at adding a multi-dimensional tight end when you go to a two tight end set? Maybe you have two tight ends who can block. Maybe you have one who can line up at H-back or fullback for a few plays while the other guy lines up in line. And maybe neither one of them is a liability as a blocker. And it gives you some versatility on offense. Add a guy who can block, add a guy who can line up in the slot. Just find a multi-dimensional guy, and there are a few of those in this draft. There are some guys who may not be as proven as blockers, but when you watch them on film, you see that they have the willingness, which is, I've said many times that's the key when you're trying to develop some of these young blockers. Some guys just don't have the heart to stick their face in the fan like that. They're okay to run a route and catch a ball and take a hit, but they don't want to stay in the trenches and grind it out with a big man. But there are some guys in this draft who will, and there's some other guys in this draft who have shown they can do it at a high level, and others who have shown they're willing. And other guys, again, just some interesting, intriguing prospects at tight end. And so that's what I'm thinking right now with this roster, with this offense. If you can find a tight end in the 4th or 5th round who can catch it and who can block, who could be a red zone target, I think that would be huge for this offense. I mean, of course, we discussed last week, they need O-line. Of course they do. That's the other thing. I've said this before, and I don't understand the number of fans when you suggest that the Jets take a player. Oh, they should get this guy or this guy, and it's not a guy who fills the biggest need on the roster. And fans, especially when you talk about first round picks, but it happens with several rounds. Guys who seem to think that if you're not picking the biggest need on the roster, they act like it's the only pick you have. Like I've done that in years past. I'll be like, oh, yeah, they should take this guy. And maybe it's like their 5th biggest need. but they have 7 or 8 picks, and people are like, oh my God, how can you say that? He's not our biggest need. And it's like, yeah, they got 7 picks, 8 picks. They might make trades. They might have 10 picks. When people flip out when they see a player's name that doesn't address a top 3 need. You would think a team is limited, like you get 1 or 2 picks every year. Doesn't make sense to me. But we're going to go to the phones real quick right now. We have a caller on the line. Caller, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Yeah, how you doing?
You're on the air, caller.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. I'm just calling. I'm from New York and Brooklyn and everything, and, you know, this draft pick situation is a really tight situation because, I mean, they could go either way. What type of weapons? I mean, what possibly could land there? This Millsap was pretty good, but Josh Allen, they saying he's pretty good, and, you know, and then what if Bosa land there? I'm hearing that, he don't fit the system. You know, I don't want to bust if they pick Bosa, but I'll be happy if they pick him, but I'm not too sure if he's the right guy if he falls there, you know?
Well, listen, the great thing about the position the Jets are in right now is that being at 3 and with the rumors that, you know, Kyler Murray's going to go number 1, you know, most of the experts seem pretty united on the fact that there are, you know, 2 or 3, depending on how you look at it, there are at least 3 guys in this draft who are viewed as surefire hits in the NFL. Of course, that's Bosa, Allen, and Quinnen Williams. Now, Bosa's a guy who worries me a little bit because of the injury history. I think Greg Williams will find a way to make him effective no matter where he uses him, whether it's in with his hand in the dirt or if they line him up at edge in a 3-4. And Quinnen Williams, to me, is the best player in the draft, and you can't go wrong getting him either. I think we're gonna let you go. You got quite a bit of background noise there. So had to let that caller go. That was getting a little bit out of control. But listen, the Jets are in a great position when it comes to the draft. Having an opportunity to get a blue chip guy like a Bosa or Quinnen Williams, and then again Josh Allen, is whether or not you class him as a blue chip or whatever, he still has the potential to be an elite player. And you're going to get one of those 3, or you're going to be offered a bunch of picks to move down. So I mean, that to me, I can't remember the last time the Jets were in the driver's seat quite like this, because every season in the past, when they've managed to land in the top 5, top 10, it's always about a quarterback. It's always about you can't pass on a QB. You can't pass. Now, of course, Mike McCagnon did pass on some QBs, most notably Patrick Mahomes, which hindsight, you know, not a great move, but you still ended up with a quarterback in Sam Darnold. And, you know, I know some people, Deshaun Watson, but to me, from what I've seen of him, really good player. I'm not going to knock Deshaun Watson as an overall player, but the guy holds on to the ball so damn long. That Houston O-line takes a ton of heat for giving up sacks, but he doesn't do them a whole lot of favors. So, but either way, for the Jets to be sitting at 3, the chance to get a blue chip prospect, whether it's Bosa, whether it's Allen, whether it's Williams, I've said it before, they're in a great spot. Trade down and get a bunch of picks, or get a blue chip guy for your front 7. And you know, that's something I did want to bring up tonight as well. We'll get back to the tight ends in a second. But no, I lost my train of thought. Oh, that was it. Because, you know, a lot of people get upset about, you know, how much draft capital, premium draft capital, the Jets have spent on defense in recent years, which makes sense. Of course, you know, they've really ignored the offensive side of the ball for far too long. Now, that may happen again this year, but in all reality, the Jets' biggest needs on offense at this point, you would have to say center. Now, I you know, I'm not going to get into the number 1 receiver thing again, because I think you can do just fine. You have 3 really good receivers and a really good tight end. That's 4 quality targets with Le'Veon Bell that you should be able to score points. I don't want to hear that they have to have a number 1. You know, teams win Super Bowls without elite receivers all the time. And there are a whole bunch of elite receivers out there with 0 Super Bowl rings. All right. You know, I've gone through that a million times on this show. Just look at the last 10, 15 Super Bowl winners and how many of those guys had a guy as good as Terrell Owens or as good as Julio Jones or as good as DeAndre Hopkins. None of those teams had a guy that good, and they still won because they had good targets, quality targets, good depth. They could spread the ball around. So not, I'm not a believer in that they have to get a number one receiver. You want to get a better receiver, or a young guy to bring along, that's fine. But as far as them going defense in rounds 1 and 2, which could happen this year, or 1 and 3, I should say, unless there's a trade down and they add picks, I wouldn't hate that. You've added an all-pro left guard. You've added arguably the best running back in the NFL. You've added a very good slot receiver. You've spent a lot of money upgrading these offensive players. And fans, to a big degree, and I was guilty of this for a long time too. We all want the great draft picks. Of course you do. You want every damn pick to be an all-pro. You want every pick to work out. The fact of the matter is they don't. And what you need to look at is your organization dedicating enough assets to both sides of the ball to win? Are you acquiring quality players? And are you going to get mad that they didn't draft an offensive player early on, despite the fact that they just added 3, well, at least if you want to count, Osmele and Le'Veon Bell, 2 all-pros, 2 elite players at their position, and then Crowder in the slot, who's going to be a damn good player in that spot. Like that's 30-some, nearly $40 million on offense. So you're going to watch them spend that much money on offense and then complain if they didn't spend a second-round pick on offense? And I'm not saying they shouldn't. Again, at this point, third round or second if they add some picks. I mean, I don't. For me personally, you're not going to hear me complain if they go defense in this draft. Now, you sure as hell hear me complain if they don't add a center at some point. At some point. Not in round 1 unless you move down and add a couple you trade down with the Giants to get their 2-1s, something like that. Absolutely, grab a center, grab Bradbury. Or you move down to the second round and there's another center there that you like, that's fine too. But if they sit where they are with these picks and they go with Quinnen Williams at 1, and then they get the best edge rusher on the board in the third round, I'll have no complaints. But I'll tell you what, that fourth rounder better be a center. I mean, come on. You can't not upgrade there. Although, to be fair to Jonathan Harrison, if you look at Sam Darnold's performance, he did absolutely fine last year with Harrison at center down the stretch. But anyway, back to the tight end previews. So, again, the possibility to add a player to this offense in the middle of late rounds who can be a regular contributor, and there are some good players in this draft. First of all, you got Hockenson out of Iowa, the 2 top tight ends in the draft, Hockenson and Noah Fant, both out of Iowa. There were a lot of people who came into the season feeling like Fant was the better player, and as the season went on, some folks changed their minds, and it kind of became Hockenson, but it kind of depends who you talk to. I've seen them flip-flopped in a few different places. I think they're both really good players. I think Hockenson, I like him a lot as an inline blocker. I think he's a guy who can make plays in the passing game. Fant could probably make bigger plays in the passing game. But either way, whatever team ends up with them is going to be in a good spot. And I've said previously, I would have no issue. Again, say the Jets trade down, they end up at 15. Say they trade with the Redskins, I would have no issue taking Hockenson in that spot. Fant, he's probably going to go at the top of round 2 somewhere. And beyond that, you have Alabama's Irv Smith. Now, he's a tough dude. He kind of reminds me of a guy like Quincy Enunwa in that you could line him up at H-back. And he's a tough guy to bring down. More near as fast as Quincy, don't get me wrong. Irv Smith, his combine, he ran a 4.63. Quincy Enunwa ran a 4.45. So Irv Smith, 6'2", 4.63, tough guy. He'll move around. You can move him around in your offense, ask on the block in line or out of the backfield, and he could do a nice job there. Another good Alabama player. Then you get a guy like Caden Smith out of Stanford, 6'5", not the fastest guy, ran just over 4.9, but he's coming out of a pro system, really physical guy, more than willing to mix it up in the trenches. As I've said, you get these multi-dimensional guys who seem to be kind of going by the wayside in the pro game. But Caden Smith is a guy who gives you an opportunity to get a guy that's willing to do those things. UCLA's Caleb Wilson, 6'4", 240. I haven't watched a ton of him. Haven't loved him as a blocker, but honestly haven't seen enough of him to be all that critical. Ran a decent 40 at the combine, 4.56. He's got good hands. He's a hard worker. Like you can see, he's one of those guys busts his ass every play, and he can work down the seams a little bit. Isaac Naughton out of Georgia was an interesting guy because I liked him coming into the draft process. I thought he was going to be a guy that would run in the mid 4.5s from what I saw of him on film at Georgia, and he had a disastrous run at Indy, and he was clocked at 4.91, which I thought, wow. I mean, that was way slower than I think universally people were like, what the hell is going on here? That guy is not. You watch him play at Georgia, he is not a 4.91. Again, I thought mid 4.5s. Then he had his pro day and still didn't hit mid 4.5s, but he upper. He was 4.59, which is much better than his 4.91. Now, this is another guy who's a good blocker. One thing that jumped out at me, though, he does tend to go down a little bit easier than you would expect for a guy his size. I would expect him to be able to fight through some tackles a little bit more. Didn't see that as much as I would have liked. Kind of a mid-rounder, a guy who can block for you, decent pass catcher, not a bad option. Michigan's Zach Gentry is a guy, he comes in at 6'8", which makes him intriguing. He was recruited as a quarterback, so he's really raw. I mean, he's a project. Not a guy I would want on board now. Not with if he's there in the 7th round and you haven't grabbed a tight end for some reason, fine. But really not looking for another long-term project. C.J. Conrad out of Kentucky, he's more of a blocking guy. Not really what the Jets need. They brought Tomlinson back, who, I mean, let's face it, if things work out, Tomlinson doesn't make the roster. Somebody's got to outperform him. Jay Sternberger's an interesting guy. He's the next guy on the list. Now, he's out of Texas A&M, and I've seen him. There are a couple of guys that you look at in different mocks, and, listen, we all love reading about these guys. We all love watching these guys. We all love giving our best guesses to where they'll go. But I'll tell you what, if the guys who do this for a living are as far apart on their projections with these guys as they are, what the hell do we expect, a blogger, podcaster, writer, fan, whatever, whichever site you like, whichever pods you listen to, whichever experts, on the major networks, how are they going to get it right when the draft nicks are as far off as they are? Jake Sternberger is a guy who I've seen mocked anywhere from the 2nd round to the 6th round. I actually had him, I think, as a 5th or 6th rounder in my initial mock with the Jets. And then I was blown away when I saw him mocked in the 2nd, and I can't remember who it was, but somebody had him going really early. And I thought, Jesus, am I that far off on this guy? Like, he doesn't look like a 2nd rounder to me. And then I saw him in another place listed as a 5th. So, these guys are all over the map with some of these players. But the guy that if you came to me and said the Jets can spend a 4th or 5th rounder on a sleeper tight end, let's say they went defense in round 1, defense in round 3, and now you're sitting there in round 4, maybe round 5. I don't know if this guy will be around in round 5. That's why I sometimes I am guilty of falling in love with a player and showing a willingness to draft him a round or two earlier than he's projected because I want to make sure you get him. But a guy who jumped out to me, I saw his name earlier in the season, didn't have much of a chance to watch him. Then since I realized I was going to be doing tight ends, I focused a little more on them the last few days. And I had his name, on the list of eligible tight ends that I had written down, but I hadn't watched much of them, not any of them, to be honest. And just the last couple of days, I watched as much of them as I could find. Again, small school guy, Josh Oliver out of San Jose State, 6'5", 249, ran a 4.63. But this guy, I mean, he plays tough, was a converted linebacker, I believe, out of high school. I don't think he ever saw action at linebacker in college. I would have to look deeper into that. But just in terms of his size, 6'5", he's got good size. Speed's decent at 4.63. Can definitely block. He's a guy that you could, much like Chris Herndon, you could have him on the field for all 3 downs. And some of the catches that I saw him make, just contorting himself, balls that were thrown behind him, balls that were thrown low, he showed really good hands. Production was excellent, and I don't see how. I mean, I think someone's going to get a steal with this guy. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But from what I saw of him, Josh Oliver, that's a guy that if I'm the Jets and he's there in round 4, round 5, absolutely grabbing him, absolutely pairing him with Chris Herndon, and giving Sam Darnold another weapon down the field. The other guy, the other small school guy I want to throw out there, and this is, when you get these really small school guys, it's almost impossible to find a decent amount of film on them. So you have to find a couple highlight reels, and that's about it, and some scouting reports that you can read. But Stetson's Donald Parham, Parham, 6'8", 4.65. 4.65 that's a pretty damn good time for a guy who's 6'8". I mean, you talk about a guy. Here's a guy you could draft. Probably get him late, probably round 5, round 6, and you can, if nothing else, you can work him in early on as a red zone guy. He's 6'8". You had somebody like that. You have somebody like that in the huddle. I don't know how you don't see how much that could help your quarterback, your young quarterback, from day one. The problem with Donald Parham, and as the case with any guy who goes to a school that small, he really does. When you watch some of these highlights of it, pardon me, when you watch some of these highlights, he's literally a man among boys. He looks so much better than the guys he's playing against that you want to get a look at him against some better competition. Now, he impressed at the Senior Bowl. He did a good job there. But listen to his, again, it's Stetson. It's a small school. You really wish this kid went to Michigan or Ohio State, somewhere big-time school, so you can see him against the big boys consistently. But for 2018, 85 catches for 1,300 yards and 13 touchdowns at 6'8" out of Lakeland, Florida. The problem? He's playing Valparaiso and Drake. You're not getting a true read. But everything you find on the guy in regards to his performance during Senior Bowl week is that he was turning a lot of heads. And you can see why. I mean, a 6'8" tight end in this offense as a red zone option, I mean, I would love it. That would be absolutely fantastic. And again, he's a guy you could probably get late because of the fact that he's a small school guy. And the last guy I'm going to mention, Dawson Knox. He's an Ole Miss guy. Didn't put up huge numbers in college, but from what I've seen of him, when I was watching some Ole Miss because of the receivers they have there, and again, I knew we'd be talking a little bit about tight ends tonight. I think that his production wasn't great, but he's still a guy at 6'4" who runs well and has an opportunity. I'm trying to think where I've seen him projected. I meant to jot that down. I've seen him mentioned as a mid-rounder. And that's where things get dicey with the Jets because they have so few picks. And I really think, and we'll see what happens, but I think we're going to see, come draft time, we're going to see Mike McCagnon, even if the Jets don't trade down in round 1, which so many of us are anticipating. And real quick, Dawson Knox, he had 15 grabs, 284 last year, 24 for 321 the previous season. But again, that team was so loaded with receivers and just offensive weapons that sometimes you get these guys who they don't work themselves into the mix because there's just not enough footballs to go around, and that's where you maybe get a steal. And that's what Dawson Knox offers in terms of value. So that's something you have to like. And So as I was saying, with in terms of trade value, trading down, you can't really rule out the possibility of, stuff like this goes under the radar. But especially with Mike Maccagnan, we've seen this a few times where he'll make a lot of mid and late round deals. Move down 8 spots, move up 3 spots. Because it's not a first round deal, people kind of forget that they happen. They don't realize how many trades this team has made, during the draft, moving up and down here and there. And I think this year the goal could be to say, look, let's round 4, round 5, whatever it is, let's move down a couple times. And if we can move down 8 spots in round 4 and add a 5th, or move down a few spots in round 5 and add a 6th and a 7th, and I think that's what you're going to see this team do. I don't think you're going to see them out of this draft without any more picks than what they have now. But if the goal is to make some deals before the draft, you have to wonder if Mike Maccagnan, looking at their roster, who does Mike Maccagnan have on his 53-man roster that him and Adam Gase feel like they can afford to move and not miss a beat, but get a guy who can, or do they have a guy who can get them a draft pick or 2? And, there's some obvious names. And, there aren't a ton of names. There's not a lot of guys on this roster that you think the Jets that would be expendable, but they could bring something back in terms of a draft pick. And really, the one guy that jumps out, and really should to many fans, because there's a good chance he will be gone, and that's Darren Lee. Who, I'll tell you what, that did cross my mind during that unveil the other day, or last night, is that Darren Lee was sort of unofficially the new uniform guy on Twitter. He tweeted about it more actively than any other player. And if that didn't make it obvious that he's not part of this team's future, nothing else would. Because let's face it, this guy was, again, he did the most talking about the new uniforms. And now, when the uniforms are unveiled, he is a former first-round pick, and he's not invited. He's not coming to the party. They got Chris Herndon there. They got Avery Williamson there. Quincy, Robbie, Sam, Leo, Jamal. No Darren Lee. Darren Lee not invited to the party. And I'll tell you what, man, you got Darren Lee, and I tweeted this out. These guys do this stuff, for me, I'm just guessing, but I think it's the drug stuff. I think that was the last straw for the Jets. I hope I'm wrong. As I've said, I would love for them to keep him and let Greg Williams find a role for him in this defense. But I just don't see it happening. All signs point to a Darren Lee departure. And it's weird. I will admit, this is a weird thing that I do sometimes. I'll sour on a player, and I'll be down on a guy for a while, and especially when they do something stupid like the drug stuff, and there's that part of me that doesn't want him on the roster anymore. But then there's then there's a little compassion where I'm like, you know what, man? I'm mad at this dude. I'm mad at what he did, but I want him to bounce back and prove me and everybody else wrong. I want him to have an awesome year. But in Darren Lee's case, I think, and remember, this isn't the drug thing isn't the only issue with Darren Lee. He did have a better year last year than, far better than he had the previous couple seasons. Wasn't even close. But he has still had a lot of off-field stuff. Some of it more just weird than anything else, but, I mentioned it a week or two ago. getting dragged out of a concert by Leo. And I get it. They're young guys at a concert. Stuff happens. Nobody got hurt. But that, being dragged away screaming at a woman in today's environment is, not a... Teams are going to frown upon that in a big way. The weird fight story that he told in Ohio, I recapped that recently. Thanked the police for helping him with the fight. The police were like, we don't have any fight. Nobody told us anything. So the drug use, the weird behavior, the improved but not great on-field play. Very good in pass coverage last year. Not so much against the run. So just not enough there. Perhaps that's the way the Jets view it. The Jets might be looking at Darren Lee and saying, look, yes, we did use a first-round pick on this guy. Yes, he is trending in the right direction. However, the bizarre off-field behavior plus the drug use makes you a guy that we don't want in our building anymore. And again, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that he, too, turns himself around, gets head in the right direction. But if not, this was, again, remember, this started as a conversation about potential players who could potentially be traded to add a draft pick. And I think he would be one of those guys. I think Darren Lee is the top guy. Jets will likely look to move and see if they can get a draft pick. I don't think you're going to do better than a fifth rounder. I think I said maybe a fifth, maybe you get a conditional fourth. Hey, it's a 5 next year, unless he starts X amount of games, and then it becomes a 4. Something along those lines. Who knows? But beyond Darren Lee, probably the next closest guy, and this kind of changed when the Jets said they were staying in the 3-4. But you think Jordan Jenkins, they could have some trade value, and that'll just come down to what Greg Williams thinks of him. Because I like Jordan Jenkins a lot. Again, I'm not putting him in Canton, but I think he's a real good, high character guy. Jordan Jenkins, just some of these guys, you get that little glimpse of their personality when because of all the access we have on the internet and Twitter and all that, and just Jordan Jenkins just seems like a genuinely good dude, good player, good guy. But is he a guy that Greg Williams envisions as being able to get enough out of him versus what the Jets might be able to do if they say to Greg Williams, well, if we go with an edge guy in the draft, is there somebody else that you think can outperform Jordan Jenkins that we might be able to get with a pick that we could trade him for? Jordan Jenkins had 7 sacks last year, 28 quarterback hits and hurries. So you could have very easily had a 10-sack season. So do you look at that and try to market him out there and say somebody offers you a 4th for Jordan Jenkins? Does Greg Williams see somebody in the draft who he thinks, yeah, I can get me that guy with the 4th round pick and I can put him to use and get more out of that guy, or as much out of that guy as we can get out of Jordan Jenkins? So I'm not saying this is a guy that I would like to see traded, because I like Jordan Jenkins a lot. I hope he plays well enough to earn himself another deal with the Jets. Like I said, good player, productive, looks to be ascending. And, man, frustrating. It would have been great if he had a 10-sack season. Ended up with 7. Like I said, according to Pro Football Focus, 28 other quarterback hits, hurries, pressures, whatever you want to call them. But really, outside of those two guys, if you're looking at it objectively, there's really not a lot there in the cupboard in terms of trades. Because someone asked me that the other day. If they're going to add picks, now could they move Brian Winters? Is he a guy? Do they like any of the other? Do they like Ben Braden enough that they can say, you know what, Brian Winters is a good but not great player. We think we can get Ben Braden to be a good player, and we can save the $6.5 million we owe Brian Winters, and we can move him for a late round pick, and Ben Braden takes his spot. I would imagine, given the fact that Brian Winters, again, he's a guy you can live with. I say it all the time. Fans fall in love with, they want everybody to be a Pro Bowler, but that's not the way the real world works. So maybe Tom Compton is a guy who has starting experience. Do they think he's just as good as Brian Winters? Jordan Morgan is a guy who hasn't played a lot, but was highly thought of in Chicago after the Senior Bowl. Now, of course, something went wrong if the Bears let him go. But the point I'm making is that if you're trying to add picks and you have a player in Brian Winters who probably would have some value when you look at offensive lines around the NFL, there are plenty of O-lines who would be better through the addition of a guy like Brian Winters. And then with Morgan, Compton, Braden, with those guys on the roster, all of them younger than Winters with the exception of Compton, is he a possible target to be traded? We'll find out. The draft will be here. I mean, it can't get here soon enough. I think it's going to be, it has the potential to be a draft that really, again, given the fact that the best talent is on defense, it has the chance to get this Jets defense to another level. Now, of course, they need to address the secondary, the corner spots, I should say, at some point. Be it this, the most likely scenario is next season. That's a heavy target. I think you're going to see Tremaine Johnson get a shot to get his head on straight, and you're going to see Darryl Roberts and Derek Jones get a shot for that number 2 spot. Really hope one of those guys shines and win. Really, Derek Jones. I mean, the guy who is as electric as he is, the things he can do physically. It's just going to be a matter of whether or not mentally he's keeping up with the game well enough to win that spot, because that guy he's got some electricity in him. So the Jets may view him as a guy who can play, because really they didn't really go hard after any corners in free agency. I mean, not that there were a ton of great ones out there, but I think the Jets are a little bit more comfortable at corner than people realize. And that was something I'd said the other day, and a couple people thought I was a little bit nuts. But all this talk about the Jets need a number 2 corner, the Jets need a number 2 corner, the Jets may view it differently, because they've got their number 1 in Tremaine Johnson. Whether you like it or not, the money he's making, he is their number 1. And that's why they are hoping and praying that Greg Williams can get him to play better than he played last year. On the other side, if the Jets are going to Greg Williams and saying, all right, Greg, here's all the film we have on Derek Jones, here's all the film we have on Darryl Roberts. Now, of course, these guys, well, Derek Jones specifically didn't see a lot of game action, but they're film and practice. Indoors, outdoors, they have the cameras rolling. They can take a look at that. And then, of course, you have Denard Wilson, who's the secondary coach, who worked with Greg Williams in St. Louis. And Greg Williams obviously likes him enough. He retained him on his staff once he was hired. And if Greg Williams goes to Denard Wilson and says, listen, man, are either of these 2 guys good enough to be a number 2? If Denard Wilson says, look, Darryl Roberts outplayed our number 2 last year in Morris Claiborne. Granted, it wasn't a sustained, wasn't for 16 games, but in small flashes, he outplayed the guy he was behind on the bench. And then Derek Jones behind him looked damn good when he got some run against the Patriots in Week 17. And he's got some great skills. So sometimes you see it. Sometimes teams roll the dice, and they look internally and say, we have some guys who can get the job done. Or we have some guys who we think can get the job done, and we're going to give them a look. So I wouldn't be so quick to assume this team is going to use a premium pick on a corner. Now, don't get me wrong. If they add picks in round 1 or top of round 2 and Greedy Williams falls, that's a whole different ball game. But as it stands now, I think the Jets are comfortable at corner. I think if they do add one, it won't be an early premium. It won't be a 1 or a 2 or a 3. Maybe a later round guy. But we will see, and all of our questions will be answered in just a few weeks. So hang in there, Jets fans. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight, JetNation Radio. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you again actually in a few days. as I said, push tonight's show back a few days to cover the uniforms. And we will be back next week with more Jet Nation Radio. Take care, Jets fans.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to follow Glenn on Twitter at AceFan23. And the show can be found at Jet Nation Radio. Until next time, go Jets!